Next on Currents News, new immigration regulations out today could dramatically cut the number of legal immigrants allowed to enter and stay in the U.S., likely making it harder for low-income migrants to come into the country. In the Jeffrey Epstein case, investigators are learning of serious irregularities at the New York jail where the accused sex trafficker was found dead. Pope Francis is pointing out it's been 70 years since the Geneva Conventions were signed by every country in the world. Why the Holy Father says they're needed now more than ever. Plus, a California science teacher is under fire after handing out gender identity worksheets to his class. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Tamara Lane. There's a lot of reaction tonight to President Donald Trump's new order tightening the rules for legal immigrants. He's targeting anyone who relies on public aid for support. The move could make a big difference in U.S. immigration. Camila Bernal reports the very latest.
The number of legal immigrants allowed to enter and stay in the U.S. could dramatically drop.
Today, USCIS, the agency I head as part of the Department of Homeland Security, has issued a rule that encourages and ensures self-reliance and self-sufficiency for those seeking to come to or to stay in the United States.
The new rule would make it easier to reject green card and visa applications for legal immigrants who rely on or who are likely to rely on public benefits in the future.
It will also help promote immigrants' success in the United States as they seek opportunity here.
But critics say the move specifically targets low-income immigrants, would keep families apart, and prompt legal residents to forego needed public aid, which could also impact their U.S. citizen children.
America is at its best when it helps people who fall down get up and become independent, contributing members of society. People like myself and my family were allowed to become contributing members again. And that is something that, unfortunately, this new rule and regulation harms.
Undocumented immigrants would not be affected, and the regulation is likely to meet legal challenges, but it could still spark fear among the immigrant community. In Washington, Camila Bernal, Currents News.
The Trump White House is making another major rule change, this time to the Endangered Species Act. The Interior Department announcing today the action will scale back regulations. The Trump administration says this will allow the focus to be on the rarest species. Critics are complaining the changes could push more animals and plants towards extinction. A court fight is likely. There are more questions than answers tonight surrounding the death of accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. The feds are saying he died in an apparent suicide while awaiting trial in a Manhattan jail. John Lawrence reports.
The FBI has started an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's death.
He was probably the highest priority and highest profile person in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons at the time. And second of all, he had reportedly had a recent suicide attempt.
Attorney General William Barr released a statement Saturday that said he was appalled that the multimillionaire died while in federal custody. Barr also said the Inspector General is opening an additional investigation because Epstein's death raises serious questions that must be answered.
It is very difficult to understand how he was not on a suicide watch and how this happened without some involvement of those who were responsible to hold him safely.
Epstein was reportedly found with marks on his neck July 23rd and was placed on a suicide watch. Psychologists took him off suicide watch at the end of July, according to a source familiar with the matter. On Friday, unsealed court documents revealed new allegations of sexual abuse claims against Epstein and several associates. He was dead the next day. And although Epstein is dead, the alleged crimes linked to him are still alive.
Anyone who helped Jeffrey Epstein run this sex trafficking ring, promote it, profit from it, should still be very worried. Southern District has made clear, we're not done. We're still coming after the co-conspirators.
I'm John Lawrence reporting.
Attorney General Barr is also saying there's something very wrong at the MCC. That's the Metropolitan Correctional Center where Epstein died. This morning, Barr spoke out.
I was appalled, and indeed the whole department was, and frankly, angry to learn of the MCC's failure to adequately secure this prisoner. We are now learning of serious irregularities at this facility that are deeply concerning and demand a thorough investigation.
Barr also said the case will continue and focus on Epstein's co-conspirators because the victims deserve justice. Tonight, there's news that a pro-life law, which would be the most comprehensive in the nation, is being considered in Tennessee. Lawmakers are deciding on a total ban of abortion in the state. Right now, hearings are being held. Voters would go to the polls in January to approve the measure. If it passes, as expected, supporters hope the law winds up before the Supreme Court, giving the justices an opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now to a humanitarian crisis brewing at this hour. As 2 ships are stranded at sea, more than 500 migrants and refugees are on board in the Mediterranean, but no European port will allow the boats to dock. The vessels are operated by charities that provide search and rescue operations in international waters. Italy is threatening fines of more than $1 million if the ships try to reach port without permission. 70 years ago today, in the wake of World War II, the Geneva Conventions were born. Also known as the Laws of War, the conventions describe how nations should treat wounded and sick, prisoners of war, and civilians. They have been signed by every country in the world. At the Vatican, Pope Francis is recalling their importance and the need to protect life. Sean Richardson has more from Rome.
During the Angelus, the Pope recalled the 70th anniversary of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. They were signed shortly after the tragic Second World War. Its objective was to ensure, during times of war, violence be not inflicted upon the most defenseless, the civilian population.
Tutti sono tenuti a osservare I limiti imposti dal diritto internazionale umanitario, proteggendo le popolazioni inermi e le strutture civili, specialmente ospedali, scuole, luoghi di culto, campi profughi. E non dimentichiamo che la guerra e il terrorismo sono sempre una grave perdita per l'intera umanità. Sono la grande sconfitta umana.
Beforehand, the Pope reflected on the gospel of the day. He stressed how life is short and one cannot reach heaven by living a selfish life.
È una fantasia credere che uno possa illuminarsi dentro. No, è una fantasia. La fede vera apre il cuore al prossimo e sprona verso la comunione concreta con I fratelli, soprattutto coloro che vivono nel bisogno. Con queste parole il Signore ci ricorda che la vita è un cammino verso l'eternità. Pertanto siamo chiamati a far fruttificare tutti I talenti che abbiamo, senza mai dimenticare che non abbiamo qui la città stabile, ma andiamo in cerca di quella futura.
Pope Francis recommended to those present in St. Peter's Square that they should always carry the Bible with them in order to read and reflect on the message of Christ. In Rome, Sean Richardson, Currents News.
Still ahead in this newscast, the editor of Crux, John Allen, discusses new words of warning from the Pope. In a newspaper interview, Francis said he's worried that some political speeches resembled the words of Hitler. John is minutes away. Tensions are high tonight after riots erupted at one of the most revered sites in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the same place that Muslims call the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Palestinian protesters stormed the scene after Israeli authorities granted Jewish worshippers special access to the location. Muslims were there to celebrate the festival of Eid. At least 14 people were injured when Israeli police fired rubber bullets and stun grenades. Violent protests in Hong Kong are shutting down the city's airport, one of the busiest in the world. Thousands of pro-democracy protesters stormed the main terminal. About a dozen people were injured in clashes with riot police today. The unrest is the worst in nearly 2 months of anti-government demonstrations. And China is calling for a crackdown without leniency or mercy. As the rioting intensifies, Hong Kong's auxiliary bishop Joseph Ha is calling for a ceasefire between police and protesters. He's saying that the city should have a cooling off period so that both sides can come to an agreement that would move society forward. The continued unrest was sparked by a proposed extradition law. Next up on Currents News, we sit down with the editor of Crux, John Allen, to go over the Pope's strong comments on isolationism and populism. Were they meant for the President of the United States? And here's some homework. A gender sheet explaining sexual preferences was passed out in a California middle school. And is God calling out to you? We have some tips for discerning your vocation. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Pope Francis is warning about the dangers of surging nationalism, especially in the remarks coming from political leaders. In a new interview with an Italian newspaper, the Holy Father said, quote, "I am worried because you hear speeches that resemble those by Hitler in 1934. For more on what the Pope is saying, the editor of Crux, John Allen, joins us now from Rome. John, thank you for being with us.
It's always a pleasure.
The Pope is strongly opposing the populist rhetoric many politicians are using these days in the face of the rising tide of immigrants. Do you believe he's calling out someone, and could that be the Trump administration?
Well, there's a natural tendency for people all around the world to assume that when the Pope speaks, he's talking about them. But the reality of this situation is, although the kind of rhetoric that Trump espouses would be encompassed in what the Pope said, there are all kinds of reasons to think that Pope Francis was not specifically addressing Donald Trump and the current debate that's going on in the United States about whether Trump's rhetoric has helped fuel a climate of hate. I mean, for one thing, this interview was given to an Italian newspaper called La Stampa, which, not coincidentally, is the newspaper that his new editorial director, veteran Italian journalist Andrea Tornielli, used to work for. So this is the Pope paying off an Italian debt, really, rather than wanting to wade into the American situation. And secondly, there's a much more immediate thing going on here in Italy, which is that Italy's own populist, anti-immigrant Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini recently brought down the Italian government in one's new elections, in which he may well seize power entirely by himself. So if Pope Francis is talking about anyone specifically, it's much more likely to be Salvini than Trump.
Well, that brings me to the next thing that he's addressed. Francis has also said that a nation has the right to sovereignty, but not to close its borders, and migrants have a right to life. That's a worldwide message, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the United States is, of course, struggling with the immigration issue, as it has been for some time, but it's hardly the only place that's doing that. I mean, Europe has been in the grip of a migrant and refugee crisis since 2015, shortly after Francis was elected. It continues to be a very hot issue here. So this is very much a global message from the Pope, and basically what he is doing is taking this notion of what he has described as a culture of welcome, a culture of encounter, and extending it into the political realm and saying that politicians who keep talking about us and we as opposed to them are not exactly modeling a culture of encounter.
Okay, but is the Pope wading into deep waters with what appears to be political activism?
Well, look, I mean, popes since the dawn of time have straddled this border between politics and religion. And in recent times, John Paul II was instrumental in bringing down European communism, right? I mean, Pope Benedict XVI did battle against what he saw as an exaggerated separation of church and state. So, yeah, I mean, Pope Francis is to some extent wading into deep waters. But on the other hand, I think he would tell you that he's doing it not as a politician, but as a pastor, somebody who's concerned not about votes, but souls.
Well, now, and I know you said that this message may not be directed at President Trump, but do you think the words are registering at the White House?
We are already in campaign season for 2020 in the United States. I think the Trump administration realizes that if it is going to be reelected, it is going to need those religious voters to turn out one more time, which includes a significant chunk of Catholic voters. So, whether the president's policy decisions are going to be driven by the Pope is one question. Whether he's going to be sensitive to what the Pope says and try to take the edge off of it is another. And I suspect the answer to that second question, at least, is a strong yes.
Editor of Crux, John Allen, thank you for being with us today.
You're very welcome.
Only 1 year after Pope Francis made him a cardinal, Sergio Rivera has passed away. The former Archbishop of Jalapa, Mexico, was instrumental in improving ties between Mexico and the Vatican in the 1980s. He was also head of the Mexican Bishops' Conference for 9 years. Cardinal Rivera will be buried in the Jalapa's Cathedral after tomorrow's funeral mass. There's strong backlash tonight after a California teacher handed out gender identity worksheets to middle school students. Eric Rucker reports it's been pulled from the classrooms after adults voiced their opposition.
Talked to a lot of parents and a lot of grandparents, and I know a lot of them have called the school and complained about it.
The controversy at Denair Middle School surrounds this graphic called the Gender Unicorn. The graphic, which can be found on the website for Trans Student Educational Resources, is meant to educate people about gender identity. It was distributed by a science teacher to roughly 50 students this week on the first day of school.
It was not an assignment. Kids were not asked to fill it out. He really was using it as a reference point.
Terry Metzger is the superintendent for the Denair Unified School District. Metzger says the 7th and 8th grade science teacher handed out copies of the infographic to help explain why he doesn't use the pronoun Mr., instead using MX, pronounced mixed, a title which does not imply a gender. Metzger says the school's principal happened to be in the class at the time and told the teacher to stop handing out copies of the Gender Unicorn.
It was probably not appropriate, just in the way that the handout looked, and it looked like it needed to be filled out, and so it was just probably the wrong tool.
It is a touchy subject, and of course it's going to be when it comes to youth.
Catalina Zambrano is the gender spectrum coordinator for the Central Valley Pride Center. Zambrano says she uses the Gender Unicorn graph for educational purposes for her job, adding that while she says the point is not to pry at someone's sexuality, she does feel that a breakdown in communication is the real culprit in the case at Denair Middle School.
There's going to be a lot of people who are not going to get it. We understand that. We respect that. But, maybe a little bit more planning next time.
Eric Rucker also reports that the school superintendent won't say if the teacher is facing disciplinary action. In June, the Vatican rejected the idea that people can change their gender identity. In a document titled Male and Female, He Created Them, the church declared that changing genders contributes to the destabilization of family. Still to come on Currents News. How do you know what God is asking of you? All Christians have a job. Tips to finding your vocation coming up. With scorching temps across the country, some jobs are proving tougher than others. One little girl is making sure all mail carriers are staying cool. And the tablet has a brand new page called Our Diocesan Family, where you can share your pictures of recent baptisms, Holy Communions, confirmations, marriage, all the joyous sacraments. For more details and to submit your photos, go to thetablet.org/ourdiocesanfamily. Your picture may be published in an upcoming issue of the newspaper. We'll be right back. God is calling you to be a saint. That is the vocation of everyone, according to one of the most famous authors in Italy. Melissa Butts reports from Rome.
Carmelite Antonio Maria Sicari is one of the most widely read authors of spirituality in Italy. He's written more than 100 saint biographies. He says all Christians are called to be saints, and God has prepared a way for each person to achieve this goal, their vocation. The key to recognizing it is listening to what God is asking deep inside the heart and deciding how to respond.
I cannot hear a voice, nor do I believe I am listening to a voice if I'm living in the midst of great confusion, constantly messaging, with other voices speaking to me. I can't know which one is true, which is false, or which one is stupid. It is key to get away from the noise of useless voices and meaningless proposals.
He says the second key is to surround oneself with people who help cultivate big dreams, instead of those who block this type of action.
With whom do I spend my life? Who are my friends? Are they people who somehow transmit the voice of God? Are they people who help me? Or do I choose to be with people who, if God asks me for something, will tell me, no, that is absurd, do not listen to that. Sometimes vocations are lost because they are made fun of, or they are discouraged from being lived out. Often it's by people who should take them seriously.
The third tip is to strive for the type of life one is hoping to attract. This will help verify if it's truly one's call. Once striving for that, make a decision.
A vocation is always formed in the right company and fidelity. Other advice is to have help, like a spiritual guide. Above all, don't jump between different vocations, whether people, situations, or environments. Finally, start as soon as possible to verify the vocation.
In the stories of the saints he's written, there's always a generous response to God's proposal. Yet there are also moments of crisis and doubt. Therefore, the key is to always return to the memory of those moments in which the life-changing call took place. Melissa Butts, Currents News.
Finally tonight, come wind or rain, or in this case, scorching heat, mail carriers across the country are battling high temperatures this summer to make sure your packages are delivered right to your doorstep. But one little girl in Illinois is delivering them a package, and the kind gesture isn't going unnoticed. Marissa Sulek reports.
Cooling off?
Powerade or Gatorade?
On a scorching summer day is what 9-year-old Lydia Ziegler always has in mind.
To at least get cool.
But this yellow cooler isn't for her. It's for her grandmother's mailman.
If it has the same note than before, he will know I'm not here.
Note, snack, Powerade, and all. She packs it up.
We go this way.
We gotta watch out. And sends it out, leaving it on the front porch anonymously.
They know I leave stuff out. They don't actually know me in person.
Delivering packages to countless houses can be exhausting in the heat. That's why Lydia and her grandmother got the idea.
Because one day we looked out and seen him in his truck, and he was out there just drowned with a towel. So it was like, let's power it up a little bit.
Now, when their mailman reaches these steps, he's greeted with a package of his own. He's had no idea who the mastermind is.
Nice fun to meet you in person.
Leaving him his mid-shift fuel. And Lydia is starting to receive some recognition of her own.
Wanted to say thank you for the cookies and the Powerade.
Letter after letter from mail carriers she's helped all over the Quad City area, whether it's her own house or her other grandparents.
Because usually it's rare for mailmans to write back.
But one piece of mail stood out in particular.
This is from Washington, D.C.
The United States Postmaster General heard about Lydia's good deed and reached out herself.
So shocked, and my mind was blown.
A small act of kindness from a 9-year-old.
She's just a really good little thoughtful girl.
Who doesn't let mailmen or women go unnoticed.
But you forget about all him and everything, but I don't.
For a job well done.
Lydia says she'll consider continuing the packages when it gets cold, and maybe include hot chocolate instead of water and Powerade. That's Currents News. I'm Tamara Lane. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.